out. Now, if you don't want to do any work, if you don't want to communicate, if you don't want to represent your constituency...
Order. It being 2 p.m. in accordance with Sessional Order 106A, the time for members' statements has concluded. Questions without notice. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Madam, my question is directed to the Prime Minister. And is it not a fact that the extent to which Australia's resources and foreign earnings must be diverted to future debt servicing is the same whether foreign debt is publicly or privately owed? If so, does the Prime Minister still consider that because the bulk of our net foreign debt is owed by the private sector, it's of less concern to the government than if it was owed by the Commonwealth Government?
The Honourable Prime Minister.
I thank the honourable member for his question, Madam Speaker, and I preface my reply by making it clear that both I and the Treasurer at all times in our comments upon the question of Australia's overseas debt have expressed the clear view that there is no ground whatsoever for complacency, and that all that we have been about in our economic strategy has as its one of its fundamental objectives the lowering of our current account deficit, and to reach a point where we would stabilise our debt situation. And so let it be clear again, Madam Speaker, that that is the position of the government. There is no complacency. But it is important for Australians to understand the structure of our debt profile, because there has been, as there so often is when the opposition are dealing with matters economic, an attempt to portray a quite erroneous and fear-inducing situation. And it is therefore appropriate, when the attempt is made by those opposite and by others to equate Australia's situation with other countries overseas, that that structure of the debt situation be understood. And so I repeat, Madam Speaker, for the benefit of the Leader of the Opposition and of this House and of the Australian community, just what the profile of that debt situation is. Now, I put it in context by saying that Australia's $104 billion net indebtedness was 31.9% of production in the latest year. If you look at the composition of that debt, Madam Speaker, the latest ABS statistics on this issue show that the private sector owes 61%. 61% of that debt, state governments owe 14%, and statutory authorities owe 25%, and the Commonwealth Government owes almost no debt at all. And it is the case, Madam Speaker, that our fiscal policies have enabled the Commonwealth to undertake a massive program of debt repayment. We are in a situation where this government is the first government in the history of this country to have successive budget surpluses, and those successive budget surpluses have enabled substantial net repayments of foreign currency and of $A national debt to be made. And further, Madam Speaker, by turning the overall public sector outcome from a deficit to surplus, we've reduced the level of overall public debt, not just Commonwealth debt. Now, as the Treasurer has said, and as I reiterate, 30 years of policy failure can't be unwound overnight. But I'm confident, and I believe that the commentators are confident, Madam Speaker, that our policy approach will deliver sustained improvement in Australia's debt position over the long term. And the situation, Madam Speaker, is quite clear in terms of distinction of our position compared with other countries which are loosely thrown around, and sometimes, at some occasions, by the opposition. They make comparisons with Argentina and Mexico. Now, in those cases, Madam Speaker, which can't in any sense be properly or sensibly compared with Australia, in those cases, debt as a proportion of GDP is of the order of 70 to 80%. And of course, Madam Speaker, most of that debt is sovereign debt, debt owed by governments. And so, Madam Speaker, we stand quite firmly clear on the propriety of the positions, the policies that we've adopted, and when analysed, as I say, there is no room for complacency, but when properly understood, what is predominantly represented by this growth in debt is the undertaking of investment decisions by entrepreneurs in this country on the basis of their understanding that the projects for which they are borrowing will be projects which will generate the capacity for the borrowers to repay that debt. Now, that situation, Madam Speaker, can be very sensibly compared with the situation under the proposal, if it is still extant, of the Leader of the Opposition, his inflation proposal, which, as we know, has again been blown out of the water this morning by none other than the head of BHP, Mr. Lowton. Very interesting to hear what he's had to say this morning. A very damning indictment, Madam Speaker, both of the record of those opposite when they were in government, importantly, and also an equally damning indictment, Madam Speaker, of this inflation adjustment proposal of the Leader of the Opposition. Madam Speaker, let me make it clear, because these are directly related to the question that's been asked by the Leader of the Opposition.
The Honourable Prime Minister resume his seat. The Honourable Member for O'Connor has a point of order.
The Prime Minister has taken 8 minutes to
Order.
answer
There's
this
no
question,
point of
Madam
order.
Speaker.
The
But on
Honourable
the matter
Member
of
will resume
relevance,
his
I'm
seat.
sorry, Madam Speaker, on the matter of relevance, time will always indicate on relevance, but the Prime Minister is no longer relevant,
Order.
and we should get on with question
The
time.
Honourable Member will resume his seat. I find the Prime Minister in order.
Madam Speaker, and even the member for O'Connor will probably understand the relevance of what I'm about to quote. I understand that he won't like it being said, but all honourable members of this House will understand the relevance of what I'm about to quote from Mr. Lowton to the question that's been asked by the Leader of the Opposition. Because in one statement, it is a damning indictment of the record of those opposite when they were in government and what they had to do with Australia's exchange rate and how that skewed and adversely affected our whole borrowing program and our investment program, and at the same time it is a damning indictment in terms of a telling overseas comparison with the inflation adjustment that he has put forward. Let me quote Mr. Lowton this morning, Madam Speaker. Inflation, he said, has skewed our savings and investment patterns. And I can also say that some in the mid-1960s and up until the mid-1970s, the artificially high fixed Australian dollar also skewed savings and investment patterns. The Leader of the Opposition's question is about the question of debt, investment patterns, and what he is saying, what Mr. Lowton of BHP is saying, is because those people opposite, when they were in government, artificially held up the exchange rate. What does he say it did? It artificially skewed our savings and investment patterns. He goes on to say, and it's fascinating, Madam Speaker, to hear what he then to say. He was asked, how can you do that? When he said there had to be a more level playing field. Question, how can you do that? Mr. Lowton said, by reducing inflation. Question, not by artificial means such as indexing. And listen to the answer of Mr. Lowton, directly pointed at the Leader of the Opposition's proposition about inflation adjustment. Mr. Lowton said, no, no, no. If you want to see indexation at work, go to Brazil. That's his answer. If you want to see his proposition at work, go to Brazil. So there you have it. He condemns you, and properly condemns you, for the fact that you were criminally neglectful of Australia's interests when you were in office by maintaining an artificially high exchange rate. You were criminally neglectful then. We had to fix your criminal neglect by floating the exchange rate, and now you come up with this half-baked idea about inflation adjustment, of which Mr. Lowton properly says, if you want to see the effect of that sort of proposal, go to Brazil. And that's where you ought to go, because you won't be sitting anywhere in Australia in any position of significance, because you are empty and irrelevant.
The honourable member for Cowan.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. My question is addressed to the Minister for Employment and Education Services. Would the Minister inform the House of what assistance will be provided to disadvantaged young people as a result of the Youth Social Justice Strategy announced in the budget on Tuesday evening?
The Honourable Minister for Employment and Education Services. Order.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I thank the honourable member for her question. I want to say at the outset that this government's youth strategy is not simply and only directed at young people who are disadvantaged, but to all young Australians.
Member for Mayo.
And it is true that in the budget we announced a series of measures designed to ensure that our social justice strategies for young people are better targeted to ensure that they reach those most disadvantaged in the community. And what we are proposing to do is to spend over or more than $100 million to ensure that disadvantaged young people benefit from the successful reforms in the youth area which have been achieved by this government since it's come to office. Specifically, the government intends to ensure that homeless young people are provided with better support, better income support. It intends to ensure that there is more medium and long-term accommodation for those young people who are homeless, and it also intends to ensure that we take preventative measures which are designed to support the family. We are also intending to provide help for those most at risk of leaving school early, to ensure that they have every opportunity to maintain their participation within the school system. We are also intending to provide increased employment and training support for the most disadvantaged people, young people in the community, and we are developing initiatives in the health area to ensure that young people, and particularly homeless young people, have access to health facilities which will assist them to overcome the disadvantages that they have in relation to their health. We are also intending to improve information services to young people, and will be establishing another 20 youth access centres across the nation to ensure that young people in those areas where there are concentrations of disadvantaged young people have every opportunity to successfully make the transition from dependence of childhood to independence of adulthood. We are, of course, carefully targeting our programs to ensure that we develop them across portfolios to make sure that there is effective coordination across the government, and we'll also be looking for cooperation from the states and community organisations to make sure that the attack that we mount on the problems that face some young people is coordinated and is effective. If we don't, as a nation, ensure that we get things right for people when they are young, then of course we will all pay the penalty, personally, economically and socially. What we're providing is a solid foundation for the future of Australia's young people and the future of our nation.
The honourable member for Wentworth.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. I ask the Treasurer if he can now provide specific answers to the questions I asked him yesterday concerning the projected ratio of net foreign debt to GDP by the end of 1989-90 and the revenue effect of bracket creep for this financial year.
The Honourable Treasurer.
This is sort of high school stuff. I mean, we've got...
Order! Order! The honourable member for O'Connor will not interject.
Speaker, the Treasury doesn't put in a forecast for net foreign debt at the end of the year because all sorts of things affect foreign debt. In the last couple of years, we've still been running current account forecasts, but our net foreign debt did not rise, and it did not rise. Well, are you going to listen?
The member for Mayo, the chair has now asked you twice to cease interjecting. The member for Mackellar will not interject.
Madam Speaker, we've had current account deficits in the last couple of years. net foreign debt has plateaued more recently. It has been rising somewhat lately. It did because of movements in the exchange rate. Movements in the exchange rate are material to the stock, the Australian denomination of debt and the servicing of foreign debt. And to make a judgment about what net foreign debt may be at the end of the year begs the question about how the exchange rate will perform during the year, what the size of nominal GDP will be and how the current account deficit will come out. Now, this chap's supposed to be an economics professor. He can pick the papers up and find out. He can work out what nominal GDP will be. He can work out what nominal GDP will be. We've told him our best judgment is that the current account forecast will be $18.5 billion. He can then take a judgment about the exchange rate and make a calculation. But it'll be his calculation. The Treasury is not in the business of making a calculation about what it thinks net foreign debt will be. That is, we can only assume a trade-weighted index, as we have for the assumptions of the budget, of 58, not a fluctuating exchange rate, and it is on the fluctuations in the exchange rate and the size of GDP. Only on those things can that figure be understood. Now, you should know that. And to be up here asking me such a foolish question on the day after the budget about what the outcome will be for net foreign debt, when you know it depends upon nominal GDP, the outcome for the current account and the exchange rate means that you understand less than even I think you understand. Less than even I think you understand, which I can tell you, brother, is not very much.
The honourable member for Lindsay.
Minister for Social Security, and I preface it by noting the government's retirement income policy includes measures intended to increase the access of aged pensioners to savings and other income without any cost to their pension. I asked the minister if he can explain how home equity conversion schemes will be treated under the Social Security income test and what benefits they would have for older Australians.
The honourable Minister for Social Security.
Madam Speaker, I thank the honourable member for his question. It has been an issue that has been some interest, I think, to aged pensioners and the members' electorate, but also throughout Australia, especially in New South Wales today in the media. As honourable members will know, about 70% of aged pensioners own their own home. But of aged pensioners that do own their own home, quite a significant proportion have relatively small incomes. So the Home Equity Conversion Scheme provides an opportunity for pensioners to provide a modest extra income stream or a lump sum for themselves without affecting entitlement to the maximum pension. It is, of course, Madam Speaker, a purely voluntary scheme. And contrary to the assertions of the member for Bradfield, home equity conversion schemes do not require pensioners to pay interest in the usual manner. Interest and charges on home equity conversion loans offered by a commercial financial institution are capitalised, which means that in most cases pensioners face no upfront costs. Interest and charges are repayable on the death of the pensioner from his or her estate or earlier voluntary sale. I think it's important that honourable members understand, and certainly that we avoid in this area the confusion of pensioners, that what we have decided as a government is essentially to discount the income stream that flows from home equity conversion from the point of view of the Social Security income test. That is, from November, pensioners will be able to borrow up to $40,000 against the value of their home, excluding capitalised interest and charges, which will not be taken into account under the income test. Now, Madam Speaker, this particular scheme, or the variants of the scheme that will be made available to aged pensioners, I think could play a very, very important role in terms of our overall retirement income policy. They will particularly play an important role for pensioners with little income apart from the pension itself, those who need to carry out on their homes sometimes modest repairs that they're unable otherwise to afford and to pay for. And also, in some cases, people may have a necessity for an additional stream of income to provide a pensioner with assistance, again, that in other circumstances they wouldn't be able to take advantage of. So it's only part of the policy. We regard it as a modest initiative, but again, like other initiatives, we would find it helpful if members of the opposition tried to understand and get on top of what's proposed, rather than referring to their own rather vague and nebulous policy. And I think if they do that, then aged people will probably finish up agreeing with the former opposition leader, I think, saw in this particular retirement income policy a great deal of merit and a recognition that we can build on our historic pension system in this country with initiatives which encourage self-provision and enable people to solve very real problems that they face as ageing or people in retirement.
The honourable member for O'Connor.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I address my question to the Prime Minister, and I remind the Prime Minister that following his projection made during the Western Australian election campaign in January this year that home loan interest rates would not rise, home loan interest rates subsequently rose to 17%. I asked the Prime Minister, did he rely on the same source of advice as previously, namely his own, to make this latest prediction, his latest prediction that interest rates will move down, quote, before the end of the financial year?
The Honourable Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, I am in the fortunate position as Prime Minister of having these sources to call upon. One, the Treasury, two, my own department, and three, my own very considerable resources. And as a combination of in the result, Madam Speaker, as a result of being able to call upon those three very considerable resources, I will put my economic record at any time against that of the opposition. Would you like, for instance, Madam Speaker, to look at our record in the area of job creation? Now, when I announced at the beginning of our term of government that we would create 500,000 new jobs in our first term of government, you mob on the other side said, no way. You scoffed at Hawke when he said we'll create 500,000 new jobs. Hawke was right, you were wrong. Not only did we create 500,000 new jobs, we created more than 500,000 new jobs. When I said we'd bring inflation down, you scoffed at that. What's been the result there? You leftists, no, on the contrary. I'll tell you what the result is. You walked out of office. You walked out of office with an inflation rate of over 11%. Over 11%, double-digit inflation. But on the basis of what I know, my own resources, on the basis of what I had available to me, I said we'd bring it down. And we've brought it down very, very considerably, and it will come down further. Would you like to look at the question of housing? You walked out of office. What was the level of housing starts in your last year of office? 105,000. I said we'd significantly increase the level of housing starts, and did we ever? What was it last year? 176,000. So, what do you want to look at? At the area of if you want to look at the question of industrial disputation, I said that with the accord, we'd get industrial disputes down from the mess in which you left it. You had your doubts from day one. You said the accord wouldn't work. I've lost count of the number of times that you people have doomed the accord to the graveyard. You did it in the election campaign of February 1983. You've been doing it ever since. But it's stuck. It's proved an extremely effective and malleable instrument. What's the result now? The Hawke prediction is right, because the level of industrial disputes in this country is 59% less than it was under you. So it doesn't matter where you look. Everywhere that we've made the predictions that what we'd do, they've worked out. Now, on the question of interest rates, I adhere on the basis of those three very substantial resources, Treasury, Prime Minister's Department and Hawke's own intellect. I rely on those three very substantial resources
to tell you that before the end of this financial year, interest rates will be down.
The honourable member for Stirling.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I direct a question without notice to the Treasurer, and it concerns superannuation and people's access to superannuation. Can the Treasurer explain to the House details of the government's plan to make superannuation more accessible to the Australian workforce, particularly, and many people are interested in this aspect, to low and middle income earners who previously have been excluded, and also, of course, to women?
The Honourable Treasurer.
Madam Speaker, when the government came to office in 1983, the superannuation industry was a postage stamp industry. It covered only people in the public sector and some people in the private sector. By and large, most ordinary Australians had no access to superannuation whatsoever. And part of that was the fact that the tax concession was so generous that it couldn't be extended broadly to the whole workforce. That was, we taxed at the marginal rate only 5% of lump sums, and the tax was virtually next to zero, and therefore to expand it generally would have been an enormous cost to the nation through budget deficits as they were then, or public saving over time. So the government went about a change to the tax treatment of superannuation to keep it concessional and useful, but where it could be extended. And we did that first by changing the tax treatment in 1983, and then in 1988 we changed the tax treatment further by bringing forward the lump sum tax, making lump sums free of tax, and putting a tax on fund earnings, aligning the tax treatment of superannuation with all other forms of saving. In the interim, in 1985, the government, as part of the wage arrangements with the ACTU, saw the workforce take 3% of their wages as superannuation. And that was done to give this concession, to open this concession up, not just to the privileged, but to the whole workforce, to encourage them to produce for themselves a retirement income. And now in this budget, we've said we'll put on the table, when discussing wages for the next financial year, the question of a gradual introduction of a further 3% of occupational superannuation. But as well as that, that is, we would then have, over time, something like a much higher contribution running, something more like a mature contribution from any other person in superannuation. Now this, of course, has meant we've seen the assets in superannuation grow from about 15 or 17 billion to over 100 billion this year, growing at the rate, as we say in the budget, where there'll be about 60 billion a year of asset growth by the turn of the century, which will be a massive injection into savings, as well as a substantial provision in retirement. Now, Madam Speaker, in this budget we've done a number of other things, three or four other things to improve the way in which superannuation can produce a retirement income and add to savings. On the 18th of April, for this budget, we announced that the income test area for pensioners would be 100% tax-free by 1990. So for the pension, we're allowing people not simply to earn within the free area and maintain pension, but remove tax from the free area altogether by July 1990. From 1991, as we announced in the budget on Tuesday night, we'll then index annually the free area. So the free area will be maintained in real values. You'll have the pension plus the free area. So from 1995, no age or service pensioner will pay income tax. That's a full pensioner or a part pensioner. They will be removed entirely from the tax system, so that the only test which will apply will be the pension income test, and hence the withdrawal rate is 50%, and hence the effective marginal tax rate will fall from 74% or 70-odd% to 50%. As well as that, we've introduced deductions on Tuesday night for the self-employed, to lift them up with the position of everybody else. Instead of being a limit of $1,500 or $3,000, there is now the only effective limit is the reasonable benefits limit. So if you're a farmer or you're a sole trader or a professional, you can go and invest in superannuation and get full tax deductions up to the limits of the RBL. That's full up to 3,000 and 3/4 above that to the limit of the reasonable benefit limits, which means we're an employee supported by an employer gets support for superannuation, and a person in a company, their own company, can order up whichever superannuation they wish. The self-employed never could. But now this has been changed. And from July 1990, the current $3,000 limit on deductible contributions by employees with award-based superannuation, that's the ACTU's 3%ers, will be extended to all employees with employer-supported super of 4% or less. So in other words, those people who took the 3% out under the ACTU government arrangements in 1985 can now top their super up and get deductions for it to add to super in retirement. And of course, any further 3% award would be on top of that. So at the end of that, we could have the whole workforce contributing at a rate of super of 6 or 10% or more, which is, of course, the level of a mature contribution from someone who was lucky to be in superannuation years ago. And we've revised the reasonable benefits limits. But for women, the question goes to women. There's a very important package there for women. At the moment, if a woman works less than 25 hours a week, they cannot get superannuation contributions. That will be changed to 10 hours. They can also contribute if they've been out of the workforce for 2 years. So if they've been out of the workforce for 2 years, they can make contributions to superannuation. The highest average, we've changed instead of the final average salary, and many women, of course, come back in the workforce to work part-time, so their final average salary is quite low, and therefore their reasonable benefits limit is quite low because it's tied to their final average salary. We're now tying that to their highest average salary, so they can pick any higher salary in their working life and tie the reasonable benefits limit to that, rather than the lowest final salary, which for most women is a part-time salary, which of course discriminates against them in superannuation, which of course is a vast change. The other change for women is improved vesting. Many women go in and out of the workforce. Some go back to work for 5 years and then they walk away. They walk away now with nothing. Nothing. There is nothing vested in their name. No employer contributions or the earnings on employer contributions are vested in their name. They walk away with nothing. Now we'll have vesting introduced on a sliding scale over 10 years. So if the changes are for women in this very important package, if they're working 10 hours, not 25, they can contribute to super. If they've been out of the workforce for a couple of years, they can contribute to super. The RBLs will be now made on their highest average salary, not their final salary. There'll be improved vesting so that when they do leave, they walk away with a vested contribution in their name, which they can take from job to job or walk away with back out of the workforce. Now, that's a very substantial package there for women. In all, Madam Speaker, this is, of course, an enormous package and one which will totally reshape retirement incomes policy in this country, leading, as my colleague, the Minister for Social Security, said earlier, an adequacy of retirement income where we're seeing retirement income added to pension because of a much more sympathetic interface between the pension and superannuation via reduced marginal rates of tax. And hence it is a very competent and I think a very mature scheme, and one which will add to savings quite dramatically in the period ahead. But, Madam Speaker, tonight the Leader of the Opposition replies to the budget, and given the fact in his election campaign he made the principal, in his mock campaign of a week ago, the principal issue being savings, I expect tonight that, given the opportunity of a national television address, he will outline the details.
The Honourable Treasurer will resume his seat.
Madam Speaker, I take a point of order on 2 counts. An answer shall be relevant to the question under Standing Order 145. Clearly, the Treasurer has now moved beyond the superannuation question in his reply. In the second count, he surely cannot anticipate the reply of
the Honourable Treasurer is drawing his answer to a close.
Madam Speaker, the question of savings...
Order! The Honourable Leader of the House has a point of order. He's entitled to have a point of order.
To the point of order that you have raised, the questions of savings is clearly relevant to the question of superannuation, and the Treasurer is dealing with that at length. I would submit, Madam Speaker, that the answer is relevant to the question.
The Honourable Treasurer is in order. I expect him to draw his answer to a close.
Madam Speaker, this issue, which is central to the opposition's economic policy, I expect with national television we'll see details released tonight. For instance, about Mr Peacock's told us who are the winners in the proposal. He might let us tonight give us some detail about the losers, such as farmers, small business people, taxi drivers and motel owners. We can hear about whether or not assets are going to be depreciated or stocks, grandfathering.
The Treasurer is now clearly
Treasurer,
canvassing
please
your
resume
ruling.
his seat. The honourable member for Farrow.
Madam Speaker, I submit that the Treasurer is further canvassing your ruling. I know he's very unhappy about the Prime Minister's remarks last night, but
Order. The honourable member will resume his seat. He knows that's not a point of order. The honourable Treasurer will draw his answer to a close.
Madam Speaker, that these details, which were left out of the Leader of the Opposition's policy a week ago, should be there: grandfathering, whether assets and stocks will be depreciated, negative gearing in property, to see whether the opposition, Madam Speaker, to see whether the opposition's savings proposal, proposal will be in detail tonight.
The honourable Treasurer will resume his seat. Which side am I on? The honourable member for Boothby. I'm sorry. The chair has called the next question. The chair has called the next question.
Madam Speaker, I hadn't completed.
I'm sorry, the chair has called the next question. You please
Perhaps, Madam
resume your
Speaker, you
seat.
might call me after this question's over.
If you could be quiet on my left, I could have some order. I have called the member for Boothby.
Madam Speaker, I address my question to the Honourable Treasurer, and I ask the Treasurer, is he aware of the massive anomaly and savings trap that will have grown into his retirement policies by 1995 in regard to pensioner income compared with self-funded retirees? Using current income limits for comparison purposes only, is he aware that a person on a minimum pension with an income of, say, $295 a week will pay no taxation in 1995, compared with a self-funded retiree outside of the pension limits on $300 a week, who will pay approximately $2,400 taxation? Is he aware that only $5 a week income separate those two examples, while the non-pensioner will be $40 a week worse off? Will he take immediate action to remove this anomaly, to allow people making investment decisions now which will impact well on them in 1995, so that this self-limiting incentive will be removed and that the people who look forward to a solid form of investment for their retirement can do so with confidence, with this massive anomaly removed from their future?
The Honourable Treasurer.
It's not a question of massive anomalies. What the question has done is impute an income to growth to that person and assume that within the free area that they would be beyond the free area, or is presuming they would be within the free area and hence not subject to tax, and then he's taking someone just outside the free area. And that will always apply where you've got steep effective marginal rates of tax, which have existed in every year you were in office. In every year you're in office. But yet, it's very interesting you want to
Members on my left will cease interjecting.
You want to talk about our savings proposal, but you don't want to talk about yours. When I get up to talk about your mate's savings proposal here, you don't want to hear about the one which diverted the nation's attention for a week, which he discovered on the Sunday morning, and which he then threw to the press gallery and had them chasing around for a week, detail-free. He's now got the opportunity tonight to detail those things, and we're expecting tonight to see him detail these proposals.
The Treasurer resume his seat. The honourable member for O'Connor.
The point of relevance is never more highlighted than now. The Treasurer has been caught out and he wants to get out of it.
The honourable
in a
member for
political
O'Connor
way.
will resume his seat. The Chair finds the Treasurer in order. He'll resume his answer.
Madam Speaker, wherever there are high effective marginal rates of tax and wherever there are free areas, you will always find the person just outside that area comparatively disadvantaged. That's the very essence of the government. What we're doing about it, didn't you listen? We're taking the marginal rate down to 50%. That's what we're doing about it. You've been in office for 30-odd years up to 1983, and you did nothing
member
about
for Boothby.
Superannuation. Fancy you worrying about the people outside the pension system. You left them on $1,500 deduction. You left superannuation only available to public servants and wealthy private employees. You never ever provided for private income in retirement. We're the ones who've extended the free area and removed it from the tax system, and what you're trying to do is find an anomaly outside the free area. Of course there are anomalies outside the free area. That's what's wrong with high effective marginal rates of tax, and that's why we're moving to remove it and to get it down. But we've got a savings proposal on our hands. You've got a sham, which is the centrepiece of your economic policy. Inflation adjustment. That is, you're going to say to the companies of this country who are now paying 20% interest rates that you'll deduct 7% interest and give them a 13% deduction. That's why Mr Loughton said today he's seen indexation. Back to Brazil. Here they are, the boys from Brazil on the other side. The boys from Brazil. Here he is, Richard Burton in the impersonation over here.
Honourable Member Treasurer resume his seat. The Honourable Member
Madam Speaker, I remind you of a ruling about personalities, and if the Treasurer wants to play that game, we've got some beauties, Christine.
Order. The Honourable Member for O'Connor will resume his seat. The Honourable the Treasurer.
Take a point of order, Madam Chairman. This is about the second or third point of order raised by the honourable member for O'Connor, which has had nothing to do with issues of relevance or matters on which points of order ought to be made. I would submit, Madam Speaker, that sort of interjection and that sort of point of order is clearly disorderly and is simply an interjection and
certainly the points of order. That point of order was quite out of order. The member for O'Connor realises that. The Treasurer.
Madam Speaker, they don't have a savings proposition. They were in office for most of the post-war years. Superannuation was a small little industry which was ticking away for the privileged. They never cared about retirement incomes for people in the workforce through superannuation. You had the pension at 22.7% of average weekly earnings when we took office. In short, you were a disgrace. And you knew the demographics of this country were going to double the pensioner population towards the end of the century, and you were doing nothing about it. You're going to leave it to some other Labor government, as usual, to fix it all up. And as usual, we are. But now you're touting this half-baked idea pulled together on a Sunday morning to stop your friend here from being embarrassed during the week with some questions about his economic policy. But tonight he's got the big opportunity to tell us all about inflation adjustment. He's got the big opportunity to fill the details in that he said he was doing on partial inflation adjustment, to see whether stocks and depreciation are in, property is in. And let's go and tell those farmers out there who are paying 20% interest rates that when they go to deduct them, they can deduct only 13. And go and tell the small businesses who've got overdrafts paying 20% that when they go and deduct them, they can deduct only 13.
Those on the front bench on my left will cease interjecting. The Honourable Treasurer resume his seat. The Honourable Member for Tangney.
Standing Order 145 again, Madam Speaker. Last question you told him to sit down. We ask again under the same standing order now that he's going down this track to sit down again.
The Honourable Treasurer is in order, and I'd remind those on my left that we don't only have one standing order in this place, we also have Standing Order 55. You might observe that one. The Treasurer.
Madam Speaker, I'll conclude by saying, my friend, this is not a young Liberals gathering. Your constitution doesn't apply. Madam Speaker, I'll conclude on this point, Madam Speaker. Of course there are anomalies. Of course there are anomalies with high effective marginal tax rates. We'll hear tonight with interest from the Leader of the Opposition about his central aspect of his economic policy, his partial inflation adjustment.
The Honourable Member for McEwen.
Mr. Speaker, could the Minister for Primary Industries and Energy outline how changes to the taxation system, which allow for only the deduction of the real component of interest payments for taxation purposes, would affect the farm sector?
The Honourable Minister for Primary Industry and Energy.
I'm really amazed that the economic illiterate members of the National Party, if there are any, aren't complaining about the Leader of their Opposition's half-baked proposal, because, Madam Speaker, the effect of any tax proposal to allow only a partial deduction of interest rates, costs for taxation purposes will have severe, permanent and regressive effects on primary producers. Now, publicly available figures show that the cost to farmers of adopting of any proposal such as this will be crippling. Now, let me run through the cost burden industry by industry in order to put this in some proper perspective. The average increase in interest costs would be for broadacre enterprises in the order of $45 per week. If you take it at industry level, the costs vary considerably. For cereal growers, specialist wheat growers, $70 a week, $46 a week for mixed livestock and cropping enterprises, $35 per week for sheep producers, $40 a week for beef producers, $30 a week for dairy farmers, $18 per week for horticulturists. Now that's the effect of the Leader of the Opposition's ill-considered, ill-advised and ill-informed proposal. It's a lopsided version of the theoretical proposal of inflation adjustment, as it doesn't include property investment, stocks or depreciation. It will have little effect on overall savings. The cost of $4 to $7 billion means less government savings. Increases in business tax would reduce business savings, to which I would add that returns to savings have little effect on savings levels. It would distort the financial sector and investment patterns. The banks would be the big winners because they get a competitive advantage as well as a direct taxation benefit of several $100 million. Exempting property loans would amount to a subsidy for property speculation at the expense of productive investment. And what this country wants is productive investment, not another loophole, while grandfathering of old loans would effectively penalise new business ventures. And it would be a massive increase in business taxation. It would open up major new tax avoidance opportunities and add to the complexity of the taxation law. And grandfathering of old loans in particular is just plain impractical. It would wreck Australia's economic performance. The rich would get all the benefit. The taxpayer on over $100,000 a year would benefit by about $90 a week. The typical taxpayer in the $20,000 to $30,000 range would benefit by only $4 per week. As is the old Liberal theory, only the rich needs incentives, but this is absolutely a disastrous proposition for the business community and the farm community in particular. And why the economically literate members of the National Party haven't knocked this one out of the ring by now, I just can't understand.
The honourable member for Wannon.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I address my question to the Treasurer. I refer the Treasurer to the June 1989 edition of OECD Economic Outlook, and in particular that section which shows all OECD countries' current account deficits as a percentage of GDP. I remind the Treasurer that this list shows that last year Australia ranked 23rd, or at the bottom for all OECD countries, and thus giving us the highest current account deficit as a percentage of GDP for all of these countries. I also remind the Treasurer that the current account deficit for the last financial year exceeded the budget forecast by 80%. I ask the Treasurer, what level of confidence should the Australian public place on this year's budget forecast of another record deficit of $18.5 billion? And furthermore, what are our chances of getting off the bottom of the OECD ladder for the coming season?
The Honourable Treasurer.
Well, Madam Speaker, if he'd looked at the same ladder for employment and investment, he would have thought we're just about the top there. And of course, it is only investment which will change the nature of the Australian current account. And as the Treasury say very eloquently in Statement 2, it's because of 15 years of poor investment that the structural weakness emerged in Australia to give us a 6 percentage point current account deficit in 1980-81. That was 3 years before this government came to office, i.e., unless you're quick on the uptake, when your lot were around. When your lot were around. That is the 15 years before. Bearing in mind Labor was in office 3 years in those years. I mean, you went through a resources boom, and you had, for that period, an average rate of investment of 1%. If you took the resources out, you would have had zero investment. You had two and a third for the previous 5 years, when you also had investment. In other words, you had no investment for a decade. Is it any wonder our structural weakness was evident? That as soon as there was any demand placed in Australia and we got the economy out of the recession, it was growing with employment again and people were demanding and consuming things, that they went straight to imports because you had no productive base left. And you've got the temerity to put questions to us about the current account deficit when it's only been this government which has swung investment around. I gave you the numbers yesterday. For the 5 years, the average rate of investment growth under Labor was 10.8%. For your 5 years, it was 1.6%, with a resources boom, which you had nothing to do with, and 2.3% for the other. So that's the record. We have, in fact, made the shift to investment by lifting the profit share, by getting the public sector, through public sector dissaving, shifting the public sector borrowing requirement by 8% of GDP, shifting the profit share to its highest level in our history, giving us a competitive exchange rate. They're the basic ingredients of a shift in the current account deficit. And while we were doing that, we gave Australians decent employment growth, notwithstanding a very high migration program. Decent employment growth, decent, the highest participation rate in our history, and particularly amongst women. And as well as that, as I've said, these very high investment records. Now, what do you have in place as an alternative policy strategy? On the basic question of the stance of fiscal policy, you do not have a policy. No one in the nation knows what the stance of Liberal fiscal policy would be. Nobody. You would not know. On wages, you've got pilots at the moment wanting 29%. What would you do about it? You'd give it to them. Like you did in 1980-81, like you did in 1980, you gave it to them. And immediately costs swung into double digits and the inflation rate went with it. What would you do about wages? Put out a press release saying they should be related to productivity? What would you do about it? Nothing. You've got no fiscal policy, you've got no wages policy. As I said in the time of the April statement, if you can't run wages in Australia, you can't run Australia. And that's why you people are sitting where you are. That's what put you there in '83, and that's why everyone in the business community knows it today. That's why Brian Loughton said today we had this shocking fixed exchange rate for years murdering us, and we're not having inflation adjustment. I mean, he's part of the Melbourne scene. He's taken the Melbourne hero and tipped him on his head today and said he won't have inflation adjustment. Inflation adjustment, he said go back to Brazil, have a look at Brazil. You see, look, you sit there, you're lazy, you've got no ideas, you've been in office now, opposition for nearly 7 years, you've got no fiscal policy, still no wages policy, no industrial policy for your industrial structure. You just hope that you just might waddle back into office again. You just hope you just might crawl over the line again. Well, as I've said in here before, you'll be squashed like bugs on the way.
The honourable member for Greenway.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, with the present government changes in Poland and the likelihood of him becoming the first democratically elected Prime Minister, when will the Australian government invite Lech Walesa out to Australia?
The Honourable Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, I thank the honourable member for Greenway for his question. As we know, the political situation in Poland remains uncertain, with the Communist Party nominee, General Kiszczak, unable to form a government. And we are advised, Madam Speaker, that Lech Walesa has been put forward as the next Prime Minister by Solidarity and by two minor parties which had hitherto supported the Communists. Members will recall, and I know the honourable gentleman himself will certainly recall, that Mr Walesa was in fact invited to visit Australia by the ACTU for an ICFTU conference in Melbourne in March of 1988. That was a request that was sent in which I made representations directly in support of that, but the communist authorities in Poland at that time refused to let him come. How things have changed now. I'm sure, Madam Speaker, that on this issue I speak for all members of this Parliament when I say that Australia would warmly welcome a visit to Australia by Mr Walesa, and that would be whether he came as Prime Minister of his country or in his existing role, Madam Speaker, as a leading reform figure. The Australian people and the Australian trade union movement in particular have enormous respect for the absolutely courageous way in which Mr Walesa has helped generate the welcome reforms which we now see not only in Poland but in the rest of Eastern Europe, or not the whole of Eastern Europe but in a large part of it. During my recent visit to Hungary, I was able to observe that process of reform at first hand. And I'm certainly convinced, Madam Speaker, that a constructive Western response to Hungarian and Polish reform processes is necessary to give those reform processes a better chance of success. For that reason, Madam Speaker, Australia participated in a meeting of 24 states at the invitation of the European Commission to follow up the G7 Economic Summit proposals on coordinated Western assistance to Poland and Hungary. The government's now examining what can be done by way of expanding our existing commercial relationship to help the cause of reform in both countries, in Poland and in Hungary. We're exploring actively extending the Australian system of tariff preferences to Poland and to Hungary. And I shall, in the statement I'll be making to the House shortly, making further comments upon those developments in Hungary. So, in conclusion, Madam Speaker, I thank the honourable member again for his comment. That invitation to Mr Valenza is there. I'm quite happy indeed to associate myself with the honourable member in renewing and restating the fact that Australia applauds the courageous stance that Mr Valenza has taken through very difficult and at times very dangerous circumstances. He has our unqualified admiration, and as I say, we'd welcome him here either as Prime Minister of Poland, if he accedes to that position, or in his current status as a reformer of very, very considerable distinction, not only for his own country, but for that part of the world. I ask that further questions be placed on the notice paper.
I have the honourable member for Parkes, who's in front of the honourable member for O'Connor. The honourable member for Parkes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. A question to you on a point of clarification, and I refer to your recent letter and the letter from the Minister for Administrative Services on the recent decision to increase postal entitlements of members of this chamber from $9,000 to $30,525, and also to provide a totally unlimited entitlement to personalised stationery. While I guess, Madam Speaker, it would be improper to ask the rationale for this decision, I nevertheless ask you, can you give a categorical assurance that these massive increases will not be used to facilitate political direct mailing campaigns of any sort, especially those professionally prepared outside a member's office, but mailed from his or her office using these new entitlements? And finally, Madam Speaker, can you give an assurance that no member is able to use these new entitlements until the relevant appropriation bill authorising these increases is passed through the Senate?
Could I just tell the honourable member for Parkes that neither of these matters to which he refers are within the responsibility of the chair?
Whilst I acknowledge that the correspondence...
The honourable member for Richmond.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Whilst I acknowledge that the correspondence on the postage allowance is from the Minister for Administrative Services, you yourself wrote to all members of this Parliament advising that there was now an unlimited personalised stationery entitlement. It was over your signature and is your responsibility.
No, I have to disagree with that. It is the responsibility of the Minister for Administrative Services. My letter did not authorise it. My letter gave information. The Honourable Treasurer wishes to add... Oh, I'm sorry, I've got the member for O'Connor who has a question.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, in prefacing my question, I'd like to refer to... Prefacing, if you like. I want to refer you to a comment from the Current Affairs Bulletin of April 8, 1989, written by Mr Derek Park. And the article is headed Question Time in the Hawke Era. And he says, given the duration of question time has remained static, how can the number of questions have dropped? And in that regard, I point out that we've had 10 questions asked today. The answer is clearly that the government's... Mr Park has a different view. The answer is clearly that the government's answers, especially to questions from its own backbench, have become longer. In the 1987 budget sitting, 1988 autumn sitting period,
Order.
206 replies
Order. The honourable member for O'Connor resume his seat. I have a point of order.
Point of order, Madam Speaker, is under the rules regarding question time. There is not permission given under the various under section 144. There is a clear statement here: questions should not contain item B arguments. What is clearly being presented here, though it's stated as a preface, is in fact an argument. And that is exactly the basis on which it's put. So on those grounds, I would ask you, Madam Speaker, to move the question out of order.
The chair is asking the honourable member for O'Connor to ask his question and not to give me a long preface to it.
Madam Speaker, the purpose of the preface is to draw to your attention some statistics prepared...
Well, could you please ask your question?
Well, Madam Speaker, in the light of the fact that Mr Park informs us that during that period 206
The honourable member
replies...
for O'Connor will ask the question. You want something
I
of the chair.
I want to know if questions can continue to be answered, as they have been according to these statistics, by 1,000 and 1,800-word answers, of which 5 have been given by the Treasurer.
Order.
And will this continue in the light of the
The
sort
honourable
of
member for
non-answers we
O'Connor
got
will
today?
resume his seat. I think he is
And why
now
are you frightened of that information?
misusing a question of the chair. The honourable Treasurer has sought leave of the chair to add to a question.
Just on the member for Boothby asked me a question which had some technical aspects to it, Madam Speaker. There is, in the example he gave me, I've just been informed by my office, no anomaly. People who receive $5 a week more than the level at which the pension completely shades out will pay tax on the marginal income only, not the total income, at the marginal rate plus the rebate shade-out rate. At present rates, this is an effective marginal rate of 33.5%. Hence, the tax on $5 of income would be $1.68, not $40.
End of question.
Presentation of papers. Pursuant to the Reserve Bank Act, I present the report and financial statements of the Reserve Bank of Australia for the year 1988-89, together with the Auditor-General's report thereon. The Honourable Leader of the House.
Madam Speaker, a paper is tabled as listed on the schedule circulated to honourable members earlier today. Details of the paper will be recorded in Hansard in the votes and proceedings. I move that the House take note of the pulp mill's modern technology